with American Purpose. Forgive me if I quickly advertise. We're 5 months old. Please read us, watch us, listen to the podcast, join us for these Zoom discussions next Monday, 12 noon Eastern, Matt Pottinger on China, and Thursday of next week, Mike McFall on a reform and future of U.S. diplomacy. But now to the matter at hand. I should say happy St. Patrick's Day. That's right, isn't it? Today's the 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. I see Bailey and some wearing green. I have a green t-shirt on. Good luck and happy St. Patrick's Day. And if I'm right, Henry Sokolski, guest of honor, happy birthday to your mom today.
Yeah, well, she's not with us, but it is her birthday.
You had mentioned, and I wanted to remember her because you told me that this was not only St. Patty's Day, but a day of remembrance and your mom's birthday. So I mentioned that at the top. We have Henry as a speaker today and Carla Robbins as a moderator and conversation partner. The rules of the road will be the first 30 minutes or so will be Carla in conversation with Henry, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments from a terrific group online and Zoom with us today. Carla, I suspect many or all of you know, you'll find her on our masthead. She's a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. She's been with the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and if I may say, is my friend and is fabulous and is so good at these things. And Henry, as guest of honor, is someone, and Henry, no false flattery, who qualifies as what we used to call a public intellectual. That is someone with deep knowledge, someone who actually studies things, doesn't just opine, but studies things, tries to get his arm around things, and he shares them as a speaker, as a writer, author of articles and books. He also runs something called the Nonproliferation Policy Education Center. If you've not looked at their website, look at it for content. And that name is a mouthful, Henry, but I think that you have the best illustration going, not a tagline, but an illustration. We could even borrow it for American Purpose. If you're curious, have a look at his website and see what you think. Henry, you've written something for us today for American Purpose, published about 90 minutes ago. Thank you, Michelle Heyer, managing editor. It's online. You can find it at americanpurpose.com, or you can look in chat for the link. Thanks, Michelle. Henry, I think after back and forth, we ended up with a title both for article and talk, something like Dr. Strangelove's New Passion, Precision Guided Chaos, or Mayhem, or
Mayhem.
Mayhem, okay. I knew it was a bad word. And so you're gonna give us a brief briefing about what you have in mind and what you've written kindly for us. Carla will question you, test you, stretch you, and then we'll go to a very highly qualified audience or roundtable of colleagues. So with all that having been said, Henry, welcome. Carla, welcome. And Henry, Carla, do you want to add anything in the beginning? I should ask you, it's your show now. You can take it over and frame or introduce Henry as you see fit.
I think you've done such a fabulous job, Jeff. Henry, take it away.
Okay, well, no discussion of military matters can be conducted in Washington without using PowerPoint. So why don't we get that up? I'll try to make this quick. Go to the first slide, if you would. This is a picture of Nagasaki after the bombing. If you want to understand what strategic bombing strategy was for pretty much the second half of much of the 20th century, it was this. We could not aim very well, and so we overkilled, no pun intended, and a lot of people got killed in the Second World War with conventional bombing. nuclear bombing. And in the Korean War, I think we eliminated 10 to 20% of the population of North Korea with this approach to strategic bombing. Next slide. Here's where we are today. It's a bit different. We can hit what we want or who we want and not hit who we don't. This is the flying Jinsu that was used in Syria to hit a terrorist in the backseat. The driver literally walked away. Next slide. What's changing is that precision that we have used in so many wars and in so many anti-terrorism campaigns no longer is just ours. Here's a sort of a baker's half dozen, I suppose. It's 8 of the countries that have and are developing missiles that have accuracies that are roughly within 10 meters of their target. Let's go to the next slide. Drones. We have Turkish drones, Iranian drones, Chinese drones for export. That, by the way, is a drone for Nigeria, Korean drones, commercial drones, and my favorite is the Amazon drone. This technology is not only spreading to other states and other militaries, but to hobbyists and, if we're not lucky, some unhappy people. Let's go to the next slide. Well, what does that spread mean? It means that non-state actors, as well as weak states, are able to take pot shots at 5% of the world's oil capacity. In other words, we had hoped that precision guidance would civilize war by going only after the bad guys. What we're discovering is that weak states and non-state actors are a little more interested in hitting what's called value. And one value would be industrial, and they can do it. This shot got through 3 layers of missile and air defense, and it was about 1 meter accurate. As you can see, they hit all the identical spots. Next slide. Then there are the threats. Azerbaijan in the recent dust-up with Armenia threatened to use, it turned out, an Israeli missile that had 10 meters CEP against a reactor, saying, well, be careful, if you don't behave, we will irradiate a good portion of your country. This is not what the fathers of precision-guided doctrine in the 70s in the US thought we would be doing with these missiles. Next slide. It isn't just them, but non-state actors have threatened to go after Dimona and the UAE's reactor, for example. Next slide. And what's different is, whereas in the old days, 13 strikes were made against reactors, so you could say, what's new? You needed an air force. You needed to go over the target, and you destroyed the entire reactor. Now you can use these precise weapons without an air force to pick off the wings of the insect, if you will, escalating slowly, if you want to threatening to make a radiological release, or hitting things like spent fuel storage ponds and creating mini Fukushimas or Chernobyls. Next slide. But it isn't just reactors, natural gas depots, dams, petrochemical plants, my favorite, explosive depots. That is a 1 to 2 kiloton explosion in Beirut, are sympathetic targets as well. Next slide. And there are 2 ways to look at this. One is made public by the chief of general staff of the Israelis, they're a pretty tough group of people, claiming that, well, we have to worry about Hezbollah making their missiles accurate. And since every 5th house in Lebanon is either a missile warehouse or a rocket warehouse, according to the general, we have to strike preemptively at every 5th house. And what we'll do for humanitarian purposes is give them a warning and hope that Hezbollah's stern warning that they not leave their house will be overruled. Good luck. That looks like a bloodbath in the making if they're serious about that. The next slide is another way in which accuracy might work. See if you can play this. It's self-explanatory, I think.
Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that?
There's just a few seconds more that might be useful.
A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city.
All right. Now, I'm not sure you want to kill half a city, but you might be interested in looking at the Washington Plum Book and getting images. Yeah. What's the next slide? Well, I think those two uses of precision were not thought about. They probably highlight, in my mind, the need to think about passive defenses, to some extent active, and there are some things in the toolbox, but here's the good or bad news. The states that are large and have doubled down on self-government and democracy such that you can't kill the nation by just killing the top 50 or 1,500 people in every country's plum book. Those are the ones that might survive best. So Mr. Strangelove is back, or I should say the doctor is. Let's start the conversation.
Henry, thank you. First, just a little context on, and we can share the link of the Slaughterbot YouTube video, which is pretty fab. It is actually not real. It's done by a anti-autonomous weapons group, but it's incredibly persuasive and quite compelling, and really can't tell what it is for most of it. It's about 7 minutes long, and I heartily recommend it. So we can share the link to that. So Henry, thank you. It's such a delight to talk to you. When I was at the Journal, I used to spend an enormous amount of time talking to Henry. He gave me his expertise, reality testing, and a regular dose of holy crap. Is it really that scary out there? So I'm looking forward to expertise reality testing, and you've already given us the holy crap. It really is that scary out there. So we've already done that. So I wanted to start with a really, it always drives me crazy when people mix up the word simple and simplistic. I'm going for simplistic first, okay? So all of these targets that you're talking about, them holding potentially civilian infrastructure, basically, they could do that with dumb bombs. Why?
Well, yeah.
What's the difference here?
No, there is a difference. And the answer is no, they can't. In other words, you have to overkill when you're stupid. And you have to hit an awful lot of things you don't want, which means you have to have a lot of delivery systems. Many weaker states do not have advanced air forces that can penetrate air defenses to dump that much munition that's stupid to hit the thing they want. So that would be the short answer. And what this enables a small outfit or a weaker state to do is to hit the nerve that matters. And if they want collateral damage, moreover, they can wipe out the nervous system. So this is different. And this is not something that smaller, weaker actors were able to do. And you saw in a kind of, what would you call it? A Guernica-like a curtain raiser in the Azerbaijan-Armenia kerfuffle this last summer, the indications of what we might be in for. That war ended when 2 precise missiles were fired at Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan, and we don't know what it was aimed at. They were shot out of the sky, I guess, is the argument. But the elite was rattled and sued for peace right away because it could have been aimed at them.
So some of the fundamental things that you're saying is that the price is really low now. Not just the price of acquiring the technology, but the ability to wreak mayhem with a limited amount of technology is become, it's much easier to do. So has that shifted the nature of the target as well? Or is that just a different definition of war as more non-state actors get involved, or less, I'm not sure I would want to invalue it so much by notion and less responsible, but we no longer talk so much about the norms of war because we don't even try to negotiate them anymore. Armenia, Azerbaijan, they immediately went for the notion of civilian infrastructure. And it used to be that that was against, international humanitarian law. They went right for it. I'm going to threaten your nuclear reactor. I'm going to threaten a dam. So is it the technology that's changing it, or is it the different nature of the actors?
Yes. So let me
both, all of the above.
First, it's not quite as bad as you think. Every actor claims that they're avoiding hitting citizens and civil folk. I mean, they claim it, and even our military spends a lot of time, as did the Israeli general, by the way, talking about those conventions. So the conventions are talked about. However, yes, the actors are interested in threatening to do things that they claim now are, given their situation, proportionate, which is this super elastic concept, which doesn't quantify scientifically, very subjective. The other thing is, yes, what's being threatened to be targeted, I think, is changing. For example, it isn't just the Houthis, it isn't just Hezbollah, it isn't just Azerbaijan, but North Korea and the PLA, and now at least one council member in Taipei who are threatening to hit reactors. I've got to believe this is more recent. This is not something that I could track ever being discussed much before 36 months ago. So I think people are thinking about this. I think we aren't talking as much about this because even though it's public, people aren't noticing. I'm trying to change that. So
while minimizing, they're not saying we want to hit civilians. It's also against the laws of war to hit civilian infrastructure. And
well, as much as possible, there's people
within military proportionate, but the idea that it becomes your primary target, and basically what you're saying is they went for it immediately in Armenia and Azerbaijan. That's what they didn't hold hostage.
They did not fire.
But it was what they were threatening.
It's what they threatened, and there's no law against threatening. Not only that, in war, you'll find that all of these conventions have elasticity that is not as tight as people want it to be. And you could, if you want, we could have a session and an article between two lawyers arguing this, which would just be delightful.
No, I'm asking a different question. I'm just asking whether, one thing is the technology has changed who can play. The technology has changed what you can hit. And I suppose what I'm asking is that is there a fundamental unraveling of that norm of holding civilian infrastructure hostage?
There might be. I think we when we had it and no one else did, were very good about talking about that. Now that machine guns are no longer just in the hands of the British, but the Germans too, it's a different world.
So given that, and given the fact that we're not going to stop the spread of this technology when pretty much anyone can buy a drone on Amazon. You can't yet buy shaped charges on Amazon, but that's probably coming soon. And I'm not sure that, given what you're talking about, is an argument for negotiating restraint, at least among second-tier states, and certainly not among non-state actors. How do we defend against this?
Well, good question, and worth reflecting upon. I'll give you a bad answer. First of all, there are certain passive defenses that you would sensibly put out that we are not doing, which I think is kind of crackers. I don't know if you want to see pictures. If you don't, I won't indulge. I'll just talk. But you can put barricades. What's that?
We like pictures.
Okay, Brooke, go to what can be done, and I'll just show you, at least with reactors, and it applies to things that are not reactors as well. Put those two slides up, Brooke, when you get a chance. So the first answer is passive defenses. There we go, 25. You can harden things. There, here, this is a little unique. Go to the second one. It's a little too unique to reactors. Here we go. This applies to lots of things. You can see you can put barricades so that the missiles, munitions cannot couple with the building. To get through a hard structure, you will use what's called a tandem shaped charge. And it requires contact with the thing that it's going to power through, much like anti-armor. In fact, they are anti-armor munitions, roughly. You can set them off with a bird cage. You can see the bird cage to the right. You can also, if you go down, make the concrete, instead of 80 or 100 pounds PSI, which is what a lot of things are, 40,000 PSI. That is expensive, but certain things deserve that kind of attention. Now, the brown box is a what do they call it? High-powered microwave unit. Now, we are just testing this now. It's called the Thorpe system. It will fry the electronics of sophisticated drones. There is some hope, I don't know how much, that you may be able to use this against sophisticated fast flyers, maybe. And then, of course, there's this thing called active air defense, which, is a percentage game. I mean, it will work against certain things a certain percent of the time, which will at least force the other folks to increase the number of things they have to point at you. I don't think you should get excited about these things being a fix so much as these are the kinds of things you would do. If you can make your target move, that would be good. I think ultimately, however, you're going to want to not build certain things. In the case of Taiwan, for example, they're debating on whether to build out a fourth reactor, which happens to be located on the most likely landing beach for the People's Liberation Army. I would say no. And they are trying to close down their reactors by 2025. I don't know that they can do that, but I think that's smart for reasons having to do with the vulnerability of those reactors, which I've studied. Now, having said that, you need to then change your infrastructure so that it's more distributed and more self-reliant. So relying entirely on centrally generated electricity or communication systems that have, keys, massive nodes with distribution systems, you might want to start looking at what I call the Birkenstock set has to recommend if it's affordable and economic that might be distributed, like having your own sources of electricity, having packet switching, which we know a lot about for communications and redundancy. So there's that. And then I think there's the super non-technical defense, which is the most important. People complain about the deep state. My problem with the deep state is it's shallow. In other words, if you live in the People's Republic of Arlington, where I do, or one of these other wonderful places where they regulate your trash and whether you can build a garage, but can't show any judgment, you might want to get them to be more self-governing and less administrative. And you'd want that at the state, local, county, as well as the federal level, so that if, God forbid, we lost our heads, so to speak, we could still function because we have smaller heads elsewhere that actually have been educated in the arts of real self-government rather than administration simply. So, you know, an ode to civics, and countries that don't have that are going to be more vulnerable as well.
So our managing editor, our wonderful managing editor, Michelle, asked this question, which is basically, you know, how is this technology proliferating? You said the Israelis had supplied some of the technology in the Armenia-Azerbaijan face-off. We know that the Houthis are getting their technology from Iran. In the old days, in the days when Henry and I used to talk all the time, there was something called the Missile Technology Control Regime. There were, I sound like some sort of incredible sort of believer in international arms control. Nevertheless, who are the sources for this, and is there any restraint possible on this? Any discussion of restraining this technology spread?
As soon as you say any or never in social science, you're supposed to dig your heels in. And as someone who helped administer and was privileged to be around the people who created the Missile Control Regime,
I just said that because I knew you loved the term.
Yeah. I can say nice things about it, but yeah, let's get a grip. First of all, you have countries who are now making and trading in the technologies which have to do with autonomous technologies, artificial intelligence, sensor technology, small engines. And so you have, my favorite is the UAE, which has a deal to develop drones with China and Israel. And of course, we have deals with Israel as well. You know, who knows what's going to be passed on to China through that conduit. I mean, it may never happen because the UAE is a close friend, and you know, maybe they're going to show, you know, real controls, and I don't know, you know. So it's kind of like COVID. You know, if you breathe heavy on somebody in a bar, it's going to move. And I think the Turks are in the export business. The Israelis are in the export business. The Chinese are in the export business. NATO states are. It's a going concern. And I think you'll find that this technology with regard to the missiles is basically Pershing II technology, which was developed in the late 70s. And the drone technology is actually mostly hobbyist. You know, people like my brother-in-law who made model planes with radio just kind of stepped up their game. And, you know, that there are a lot of civilian applications that make a lot of sense for this stuff. Good luck. I think identifying the sales might be helpful. Licensing people more would be helpful. But this is kind of like controlling our sexual urges. Good luck.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to think of the Missile Technology Control Regime in those terms. I want to remind everyone, you know, we really want to throw it open. We've got a great group of people, and we've got more than 30 people here. There, please, you know, raise your hands, you know, speak up, put your questions in chat. And as much as I would love to engage Henry for this whole time, Yulia, speak us.
Hi, thank you so much for the discussion today. I have to say, Henry, if I may call you that you just turned my world upside down because I was just an hour earlier moderating a panel on South Caucasus and interconnectivity there, following the Nagorno-Karabakh II war, and Carla kindly mentioned that as a good example. My takeaway from that discussion was development leads to peace, the long-term strategy, because these countries have no other choice but to do that. But with the discussion now around targeting civilian critical infrastructure and the need in these regions at the intersection of insecurity, let's put it that way, to develop further critical infrastructure, if threats already, as you pointed out, can lead either in such a small conflict or in the context of Russia, Turkey, or that space, to targeting critical infrastructure, very rare critical and important critical infrastructure in that region. How can these countries think about developing, as you say, more governance in the relationship between private and public sector, so that hotspots like, for instance, LNG terminals, Alexandroupolis, pipelines that so far have been avoided as a reason for we should avoid targeting civilian infrastructure, critical one in conflicts. What if these in development projects get targeted? How can we think in these spaces where there's not as much development and not as much money and resources and technology as, for instance, in the United States, in terms of developing them so that they don't become primary targets for a precision airstrike?
Well, good news. I don't know about you, but COVID's been a blessing to NPEC, my organization. Our productivity is up about 50% because we're no longer a travel agency. We only deal in substance for the most part, meetings like this. And so we can do more of it. I can write more. I think roughly when it comes to infrastructure and cooperation, first of all, don't meet so much. Do it more virtually. Do not concentrate value in buying, my favorite, white elephant would be a large reactor. I mean, I'm not wild about small ones, but you don't do that. You think about distributing what you've got. Maybe you don't spend as much money on a massive project. You think about breaking it down. Pipelines are a problem, but maybe you invest in pipeline repair, which is very, very good. I mean, it isn't like pipelines haven't been hit before. So you think about cooperating on repair, distribution. You think about doing things in smaller chunks. It's not a bad way to go. I mean, I just gave you a ton of new meetings and grant ideas, right? I mean, you're now enabled to take over the world with a slightly different perspective. You have an organization in something called IRENA you might look at the UN, which is basically looking at alternative forms of energy storage, use, consumption, distribution, generation. Part of the answers are found in those kinds of institutions, and certainly in AI and cyber, the distribution of nodes is very important to protection. So there are answers.
Dan Seligson, you want to give voice to your question? It's a good question. Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, look, this is fascinating. But what I wanted to know is, obviously, you're telling us, reminding us that theaters are everywhere. But I wonder if you would tell us where you think the primary theaters are. You've already named Israel.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I'll get this wrong, but I am studying this, and I've got people smarter than me helping me. So this is our collective, I won't say wisdom, but hunch. I think clearly the Middle East. I think clearly East Asia. I mean, essentially anywhere where weak states might take pot shots at one another. India and Pakistan. Central Asia. So I want you to understand, though, you don't have to worry about the theaters being local. With any bad luck at all, you'll get a Suez or Sarajevo. It will escalate. In each one of these cases, the proxies have sponsors. The sponsors have sponsors. And in the Azerbaijan-Armenian case, the Russians weighed in heavily. They encouraged the Armenians to fire the Iskander-2 missiles to Baku, which concluded the event and helped them launch them. The Israelis and the Turks had a hand in what Azerbaijan was doing. You have two nuclear-powered arsenal-armed countries involved in orchestrating events. The general that I showed you, the Israeli general, was criticized by other Israelis for being naive and thinking that he could take pot shots at folks in Lebanon in a massive way without Iran getting involved. If Iran got involved, would Russia, China, and the United States simply focus on COVID? I mean, I don't know, maybe, you know. So we're on, I think the world could get very connected. And I suppose if there were arms control or diplomatic things to do, it might be to be more aware of this and not so surprised, but maybe start talking about the ways in which things could escalate, such that nuclear armed nations would be weighing in.
If I could just follow up one little aspect about that.
We're having a very hard time hearing you.
Give me a second.
We love follow-up, but do you want to write it into
Put something
chat?
that perhaps, and we could read it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to follow up with one thing. You mentioned non-state actors. That's a big deal. And then we're talking about India and Pakistan.
Yes.
So is the model here that non-state actors who have sponsors initiate this on behalf of state actors, and then it escalates? Is that?
Or state actors act on their own? Which is it? Yes.
I think what Henry's saying is it's the new nature of war.
Right.
It doesn't matter who the player is. It certainly.
But I mean, you know, I mean, we got to worry about the Bulakis. Is Bulakistan being manipulated by, you know, or not?
Right.
These are what, if you're old enough, you can remember the ad about Clairol. Was Clairol hair dye, wasn't it? It was only her hairdresser.
Why are you looking at me?
No, now don't be defensive, and I wasn't looking at you. I don't even have hair at this point. So only her hairdresser will know for sure, it was said. You know, we're going to have a lot of hairdresser questions, trying to figure out who did that, who's behind that. Much like they had to worry about in the First World War. I mean, you know, what was Serbia about? Who was doing what to whom? That was part of the problem. We didn't know.
Jeff.
Thank you, Carla. Henry, I'm going to go back for a moment and be, I suppose, mundane, but very concrete. Did I hear you minutes ago suggesting that we need to rethink gatherings like Davos and World Bank IMF meetings and Munich Security Conference and dozens of others, that these become high value targets and exceptionally vulnerable get-togethers? Is that where you're going with at least part of what you're sharing with us?
Since I have never been invited to any of these delightful things, I am more than willing to destroy them. Sure. I mean, I don't think I'm burning any bridges, because I don't think I have any. But no, I think you'd want to think twice about that kind of thing. These things, it could ruin your life. So, you know, it's not a you know, a thing without regrets. I clearly am on the edge of my knowledge here. I mean, you know, we want to involve smart people, but, you know, we don't need sophists. And the sophists will say, well, it's just the opposite. You know, well, you want to listen to that a little. I think there's a problem. So maybe you got to worry about Davos.
listen, I think you had to worry about that when you had to worry about people with, with ANFO,
Yes.
These were high value targets and with, pretty rather basic explosives. I think the question becomes, I think for me, sort of the transcendent takeaway right now from what Henry is saying is that we have shifted because the price of entry is so low and because of the ability to evade defenses and because of who the actors are, that we are redefining what's an acceptable target. And in a way that there was some restraint before. And we saw that with the Abqaiq attack in Saudi Arabia. We're lucky that it wasn't infinitely worse than that. And we're very lucky that Armenia and Azerbaijan, it was threats. But the potential and we're very lucky that what happened in Lebanon was just incompetence rather than someone actually targeting somebody. But we really are potentially one step away from this becoming the new nature of war, which then raises the question of, because it's interesting when we talk about cyber and we talk about can we create cyber norms, or at least what's the minimum sort of discussion of what you can and can't do or what you're going to be punished for. Everybody keeps coming back to, we're not going to shut down the FAA, we're not going to shut down hospitals, we're not going to take dams offline. But what you're talking about here, basically, people doing that potentially with these weapons. And it's interesting that people are talking about that with cyber, but not talking about that with these precision weapons.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, after all, they've already put gates around the Capitol, which is something the architect of the Capitol has been pining for 30 or 40 years. They always wanted to put barriers around it. They hate the public. The goddamn public is a real problem in a democracy for these people. I think that instinct is something that's going to be acted on more. I think we've got to use, our head about when and where, we always focus on the Israelis with regard to how to crack down and do dreadful police actions to fight terrorism. You might want to take a look at how the Israelis still tolerate a lot of risk and still live. I mean, you don't get the emphasis on that part of Israeli life amongst security experts. I think we need to. So that's point one. Point two, I think the relationships between nations, strong and weak, may have a lot more to do with what forms of protection, passive and active, can we afford for these kinds of threats. And in extending those kinds of maybe high-tech forms of defense, there may be some opportunities to leverage some constraint and controls over what's bought and used by various countries. I don't know. But you have to start thinking about first principles again, which I think is the point of this brief.
One of the sort of fundamental sort of religious beliefs in Washington for decades was we have to build national missile defense. We have to certainly pour billions into theater missile defense. And at least the belief was, well, NMD still doesn't work, but theater missile defense has gotten more and more sophisticated. And not only for us, but it's things we give to our allies and sell to our allies in major ways. I thought it was really interesting that when you went through your slide of what potential defenses are, and when you've been talking about defenses, I don't hear THAAD in this. I don't hear anything about theater missile defense as being one way we're going to defend ourselves from this. Why is that?
Well, I think you need to look forward to defenses that have cheaper fire rates, that are broadband. And I got to tell you, the missile defense community is doubling down on those kinds of points now. I mean, the next decade could be a renaissance in missile defense efforts. It's just they're not here yet. And the way to think about missile defense, I always thought, was the way we thought about it in the Second World War, which is it's a percentage game. And that may not be good enough between weak actors. That's the problem. For a big country, you can play a percentage. You can afford to lose a certain amount more than a smaller, weaker country.
You're also talking about just when you talked spoke also about just the cost of what it costs to fire off THAAD versus how inexpensive it is to buy a missile.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is, as much as I look down all these years at cost benefit exchange ratio approaches to missile defense, at some point they have a point, and maybe we're there now, and we got to walk it back by making missile defenses a little bit more effective and a little bit cheaper.
So has this, I'm asking questions just because I'm greedy, because no one else has raised their hand. Here we go. We have a question. Thank you, Fritz. Do you want to ask your question? You have a great background. I assume you're not sitting, that's virtual. I'd like to believe it was real though.
I wish I were in Dinkelsbuhl today, but not possible with COVID, that's for sure. This is very interesting. You obviously have you've presented a very compelling and a very scary case, and aided very well by that short video. I see that's a 7 or 8 minute video. Is that part of a larger film, or is that it? That is the complete?
No, well, go to it and get the 7 minutes.
It's an ad they've developed.
That's an ad. Okay, all right. Well, look, it appears to me that given the small size of these weapons, low cost, easy transfer, this deniability, this really puts an emphasis on human intelligence again. Obviously, there's still a role. I'm not saying this negates the role of satellites and signals and everything else in terms of intel, but this would seem to really put a premium on making sure the human intel part of your intelligence service is rather good, and of your allies. Is that, have you?
Well,
you think?
that's bad. That, as somebody who used to read human intelligence, that's really bad news.
Okay.
I mean, I remember reading this stuff, and I had the clearance name that I couldn't repeat. I mean, it was just something exciting. I couldn't use it. And of course, as soon as you did, someone say, well, that's just single source. So, good luck with that. I think, though, the general point you're making is correct. Surely knowledge and intelligence is going to matter, particularly, I hate to say it, for the offense. And I don't know how much, the slaughter bot thing that that I shared.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not here yet. Okay. I mean,
right.
That's just a woo-woo, boo-boo kind of scary thing, but there's something to it. I can tell you serious people are actually trying to think that one through. The most I've heard intelligent people say who are in the gov is size matters. That, if you're larger, you're probably going to be more resilient, and large orders are things that intelligence might notice, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that plays very well in a small state situation. I mean, if I was Taiwanese right now, I would be definitely looking at how to double down on democracy. I would be inviting the National Rifle Association to set up shooting clubs at every, district. I would be really trying to expand self-rule in every respect. And frankly, I don't know that that's bad. I think that might be what we're missing. I mean, I don't know. I'm talking here from Delaware in a condo that I'm at with my wife. The last and only frontier of self-government is homeowners associations. And that is not a very good look right now. It suggests we ought to get back to the arts of self-government a bit, because I suspect, as someone told me in a cab once, he didn't like the president. I'll leave it to your imagination which president it might be. It could be any number of them right now, depending on who you are. He said, well, we always have the state and local governments, so who cares who's running the federal government? I kind of like that sentiment, but can we make it real? Because, my impression would be that if my local government was the only government, it would be a living hell because they don't use any discretion. How do we change that?
So now that you rejected the federal government, I'm going to ask a federal government question. Too many years.
I didn't reject it. I just qualified it.
Too many years as a Washington reporter. And this is a question for Henry, but it's also a question for the group because we have a lot of people with expertise here. So the Biden administration is going to have to produce a national defense strategy. Given what Henry has said, how do you rewrite the national defense strategy to recognize it? And what do you say? I mean, where does this fit into your hierarchy of concerns? We've already shifted from terrorism to big power competition, which is what happened in the Trump administration. You know that they will continue with the big power competition, given what the president said during the campaign. Where do you put this in your hierarchy of concerns? And how does it affect your planning structure? I mean, this is not expensive stuff to buy yourself, but how does it affect your planning structure?
Well, the first thing I would do is demand a much, much higher fee for my work. And then I would guess. And the guess I would make is we need to start thinking probably about the delivery systems for a large number of these things. And they're probably big airplanes. It's my guess. In other words, try to scope the higher end, the grossest parts of the danger. Clearly, you don't want a lot of big planes with a lot of these things on them. Can you do anything about that? I don't know, but first I would ask, can we get clarity on the problem? Let's not be too American too early. Let's be European. You know what the difference is. Americans tell you what the solution is. They don't even know what the problem is. Europeans tell you what the problem is, and they never tell you what the solution is. Let's be a little European first. I would ask that we start studying this. I mean, I really am going to dodge trying to be, oh, well, here's how I'm going to rearrange everything. Let's have some discussion about this. I got to believe, like self-government, more minds will be better than a bunch of people who think they know it all.
Julia, you took up my challenge?
Not exactly. I want to get it back for 1 second as we still have time to precision guided missiles. We established expensive and missile defense expensive too. What about drones? Drones cheap? Is the solution electronic warfare? And how is that affordable? Could you tell us a bit more on that?
Well, there are various levels of drone capabilities. The cheapest ones are more susceptible. They're not as hard dealing with things like high-powered microwaves. They're easier to defeat. They don't sense or have what do they call it? AI capabilities like the more sophisticated ones, and therefore they can get lost or thrown off their game. So what you'd also want to do, I hate to say it, is make yours a whole lot better than theirs. And I think you want to discount the cheap ones as much as possible. That's going to require coming up with the kinds of defenses that will discount those things so that they're cheap, but they're not very good. Again, I do not want people to think there's a technical fix to this. I don't know that there will be right away. We Americans tend to think every engineering military problem has an engineering military solution. And I think that's true in the long run. In the short run, there are gaps. I think we're approaching a pocket of air in our trip to the West Coast, as they would say. Fasten your safety belt.
So I'm going to cold call, being the professor that I am, Professor Fukuyama. Oh, he has his hand up, thank God.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, I had my hand up several times, but I don't know how to keep it up. So maybe somebody can tell me how you do that on Zoom.
I'm sorry, I missed you, Frank.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So Henry, I apologize. I missed the beginning of your talk because I lost track of the time. But one of the most impressive underreported things I've seen lately was when the Syrians tried to move into Idlib province to retake it, along the Turkish border.
Right.
And the Turks used their drones, and
Right.
one after one, they picked off like 200 armored vehicles.
Right.
It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, just in terms of conventional, so you may have spoken about this already, but in terms of conventional warfare, I wonder whether this means that actually the kind of traditional armored or combined arms battles that we saw in the two Gulf Wars is basically going to be a thing of the past. It used to be that it was really difficult to hit an armored vehicle and destroy it from the air, but
Right.
progressively that's gotten much easier. And now with drones, you don't need airplanes. I mean,
Right.
so maybe you could say something about that.
Well, first, let it be said that when you have concentrated capital, the defense of it, including horse cavalry and battleships, doesn't go lightly or, fades off the field when something disruptive happens. But I do think, despite the debate, and there is a debate about, the Armenians really didn't have very good air defense. They didn't really look for the spotter planes, which were obvious and big and easy to spot if you had decent radar, blah, 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 blah. Overall, I think your point is correct. And that is the Russians are now working on loitering drones to attack our tanks from the top, which they're not heavily armored for. So it's going to change warfare along the lines you're talking about. But there will be, people aren't going to say, oh, let's not build armored vehicles anymore. But it is going to change the way you deploy them. You're not going to, burrow them down so that, their tops are apparent, but the sides are protected. You're not going to go into the field without a pretty good air defense system as well to deal with these things. And, my suspicion is the urgency of that Thor program, which is the high-powered microwave program, is pretty high for that reason. But it is going to change, the idea that with enough armor, the firstest with the mostest wins. It's not going to be that way. I don't know if that helps. And by the way, it's a very amateur answer. It's not like I think you want to read people know more than I do on that. But my amateurish reading suggests something along the lines that you're onto something. Yeah. Does that help?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Well.
So in the 2 minutes we have, does this also raise questions about that Slaughterbot video, which is so compelling, of course, is being pushed out by the people who want to put, major arms control restraints on autonomous weaponry. Another area that is not at all being discussed. And fundamentally, this is what's going to be driving this as well. How do we deal? Is that a discussion that has to be had, or is that just so far gone that there's no point in even talking?
We have to discuss it first because there's no hope for the future of free food without a topic that nobody knows what they're talking about to have. And this one's ideal. And the reason it's ideal is nobody, including the experts, can use English to describe what they're talking about. That said, the people that come closest to it, and in my mind, CSET at Georgetown, very good. I would read their stuff because it's in English. Kind of suggests that democracies will want to share their data, but protect it against non-democracies. It sounds right. I mean, I don't know how, where do you draw the line and what a democracy is and isn't, but we have some gross ideas. It ain't China, probably ain't Russia, probably not Syria. You can draw some lines. So that's a baby step in the direction of answering your question. But I do think that it's very hard to do arms control for problems that aren't mature. And the problem with getting ahead and controlling cyber and AI and even biotech is you know, it's great for free food, but it's hard to get all that digested and get clarity and confidence in the kinds of legal instruments you can produce right now. Unfortunately, I think these things require a war and some cases and controversies that are more concrete. We don't have them yet.
Well, Henry, you did not disappoint. You gave us expertise. You gave us reality testing, and you gave us holy crap. So it's just like the old
Put that
days.
on my resume.
It's just like the old days. I'm going to turn it back to Jeff. Thank you so much for doing this.
All right. Well, thank you for
So
having
Carla,
me.
Carla, thank you. Just quick closing words my side. We're already a minute over time. Do read Henry Today, An American Purpose. As I mentioned at the top, please do join us on Monday with Matt Pottinger on China, and next Thursday with Mike McFall on the future of U.S. diplomacy and reform proposals that Mike has actually introduced in our pages. Before I say a final word of thanks to our guest of honor and our brilliant moderator, could you do me the favor, all of you, if you're in a position to do so, could you switch on your cameras just for a moment so we can see you in thanking you and wishing you a good day or morning or evening. Thank you.
Oh,
almost all the cameras coming on.
Mr.
Good
Rubin.
to see you all waving and all that sort of thing. Great to see you and great to have you. Fabulous group. And so to Carla, marvelous as always. You're so good and skillful at running these conversations. I admire the heck out of you and that. And Henry, as Carla said, you don't disappoint. You stimulated us. You keep us on our toes. So Henry, thank you very much.
Yes, well, thank you. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks, everyone.